delightful to be out here. I'm glad it's not raining and it's not too cold. I've spent some time here in Iowa over the summer, and I've got to tell you, you guys can have some hot weather here. I don't have a towel. I've been wiping myself off. It was so hot. But I just want to thank everybody here in this state for your tremendous support. You know, one of the wonderful things about the way that our election works is that we have states like Iowa where candidates can come and people can actually get to know them. So, you know, I've been to the tiniest little hamlets here in Iowa where there are like only 400 people and 300 of them show up, and you know, we talk about stuff, but they get a chance to really know who you are, because it's very different the way a person really is and the portrayal on television. And you know, so often people get their ideals about life from television. I remember as a youngster, you know, I got some ideas. Initially, I wanted to be a missionary doctor. And then, having grown up in dire poverty, I decided I'd rather be rich. So, at that point, I said, I think I want to be a psychiatrist. Because on television, they seem like rich people. You know, they drove Jaguars, and they lived in these mansions, and big plush offices, and all they had to do was talk to crazy people all day. And it seemed like I was doing that anyway, so I said, this is going to work out extremely well. And, you know, I started reading Psychology Today. I was a local shrink in high school. Everybody brought me their problems. I would sit them down, stroke my chin, say, tell me about your mama. And then I did advanced psych, and I was a psychology major and had incredible professors like Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud. I was all gung-ho. And then when I got to medical school, I started meeting a bunch of psychiatrists. Need I say more? I'm just kidding. Some of my best friends are psychiatrists. What I discovered was that what psychiatrists do in real life is very different than what they do on television. And they're actually some of the more intellectual members of the medical community, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do. And so then I had to like stop and say, now what? And I believe that God gives everybody special gifts and talents. And I started analyzing my gifts and talents, and I realized that I had a lot of eye-hand coordination, the ability to think in 3 dimensions. I was a very careful person, never knocked things over and said, oops. Which is a good characteristic for brain surgery. I'm going to finally be able to do all that stuff. But my wife was very much unhappy with even the thought of it until we had our 2 granddaughters. And then looking into those innocent little faces and recognizing that the direction that we were taking as a country would lead them in a desperate situation. In a country where we have allowed the purveyors of hatred and division to convince us that we are not united, that we are divided, that there's a war on women, that there are racial wars, that there are income wars, that there are religious wars, that there are age wars, that there is a war on everything, and that if somebody disagrees with you, you're supposed to hate them and try to destroy them and call them names. You know, what happened to us? All you have to do is go online and read an article and go to the comment section. You don't get 5 comments down before people are acting like total morons and calling each other horrible names. And, you know, where did that come from? I'll tell you where it did not come from. It did not come from our Judeo-Christian roots. It came from another force that is evil, that is infiltrating our country, and something that we must reject, because our strength is in our unity. It does not come in our division. And a house divided against itself cannot stand. And everybody needs to recognize that just because somebody disagrees with you, it doesn't make them your enemy. And in fact, I'm fond of saying, if 2 people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. So, you know, and I think everybody is necessary. So We need to just reject that line of thinking. The other thing that I think is so important, and particularly for your generation, is the fiscal irresponsibility in this country. It is absolutely mind-boggling what we have done. Thomas Jefferson, who I believe was a genius, said that it is immoral to pass debt to the next generation. Now, if we could magically transport him to today, he would immediately stroke out. You know, seeing what we were doing. I mean, $18.5 trillion, the national debt. That's an absurd amount of money. Somebody's going to have to be responsible for it. If you tried to pay that back at $10 billion a day, it would take you more than 5,000 years. That's being put on the backs of the next generation. But that's the good news, because it's much worse than that. The fiscal gap. If you're not familiar with that, please read about it today when you get back to your dorm. The fiscal gap. That is what we owe as a government going forward. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unfunded liabilities, as well as the 645 government agencies and sub-agencies and all the governmental programs, versus what we can expect to bring in terms of tax revenues and in terms of other sources of income for the government. Those numbers should be identical if you're fiscally responsible. If you're not, a gap forms, and if you bring that forward to today's numbers, that's the fiscal gap. It sits at over $200 trillion. That is a staggering amount of money. I mentioned that during my announcement speech in Detroit, and of course the next day the liberal media comes out and says, fiscal gap, what is he talking about? He's crazy. He's an idiot savant. He only knows about neurosurgery. He knows nothing about economics. And then the very next day after that, Forbes came out with an article, 17 Nobel laureates in economics and 1,200 professors of economics agree with Carson. It took some of the air out of their balloon. But the fact of the matter is, the only reason we can sustain that level of debt is because we are the reserve currency of the world. We have the ability to print money. Now, the title of reserve currency generally goes with the #1 economy in the world, which we have been, by the way, since the 1870s, until last year. And now we're in a battle with China for that title. Many feel that China has surpassed us. Would they like to be the reserve currency? You bet they would. But, you know, their financial infrastructure just simply won't support it at this stage. There are other countries who would like to dethrone us and are looking for other currency methods. Let me tell you something. If tomorrow we could no longer print money with our level of debt, the collapse would be colossal. What happened in 1929 on Wall Street would be a walk in the park compared to what has happened. So we have got to get our fiscal house in order, and we have a limited amount of time to do it. Now, you won't hear any traditional politician talking about this subject. None of them talk about the fiscal gap. But I'm not a politician, so I can talk about it, because it's very important for people to understand what our condition is. Because if you understand what our condition is, and somebody comes along saying, free tuition for everybody, you know how to interpret that. You recognize that we're already about to go off the financial cliff. And in fact, I got to tell you something. Listen very carefully what I'm going to say. If I were in charge of this nation and I was trying to destroy it, let me tell you what I would do. I would try to drive wedges between all the people, have them all at each other's throats, hating each other. And then I would try to drive the debt to unsustainable levels. I would be inviting people in here from other countries, giving them all kinds of benefits. I would be trying to get all the people here on food stamps and other kind of governmental programs. I would be giving people free telephones, I would be, telling people they can have free tuition while we just continue to drive that debt and undermine the financial stability of the country. And then I would weaken the military. I would have a military where the Navy was its smallest since 1917, and an Air Force that was the smallest since 1940. And I would be utilizing sequester and other mechanisms to gut the military in terms of the personnel. And I would have the morale so low that all of our top generals would be resigning. And I would say how wonderful the veterans are, but I would do nothing to support them. And I would see 22 veterans a day committing suicide. All the meantime, our enemies, the global jihadists, would be growing and recruiting people even from this country. So I'd be watching our strength go down while their strength was going up. And I would be saying, everything's okay. I wouldn't even mention their names. And that's what I would do if I were trying to destroy it. Any resemblance to what's going on, I'm sure, is purely coincidental. But it gives you some idea of what we are up against and why it is so vitally important for the people to be informed. Our founders said that our system and our freedom is dependent upon a well-informed and educated populace. Why? Because if the people became other than that, they would be easy to manipulate by slick politicians and unethical media. And unfortunately, those things exist in our society today. And it's going to be up to we, the people, to change the direction of our country. We cannot depend on what was supposed to be our ally. The reason that the press is the only business that is protected by our Constitution is because they were supposed to be the ally of we the people. They were supposed to be honest. They were supposed to not take sides. And that we can no longer count on. And it's going to be up to our intellect to analyze things for what they are and to make appropriate decisions for that reason. I just give you one case in point. A couple months ago, the press was trying to say Carson did abortions and experimented on fetal tissue. Total and complete lie. There's no other way to explain it. What I did is operate on patients, take tumor specimens from living patients, submit them to the pathologist. The pathologist then take the tissue and they compare it to all kinds of specimens to give them some idea of its origin. It's just like if an archaeologist found some writing on a tablet, didn't know what it was, it turns it over to his archivist. The archivists then compare it with all the samples that they have from the last, hundreds of years, and they say, this looks like some cuneiform writing from the 5th century AD. And they say it probably came from this area of the world. Same kind of thing. And to take that and say that I'm experimenting on fetal tissue, obviously there is an agenda. By the same token, they say Carson wants to get rid of all governmental programs, support programs for poor people, even though he grew up desperately poor and must have benefited from them. And at no time have I advocated getting rid of safety net programs for people who need them. What I have advocated is that we provide a ladder of opportunity so that people can move out of a state of dependency and become part of the strong fabric of this nation. That is a very different thing, but it is antithetical to the ideological goals of some of the secular progressives who want to keep people in dependency so that they can control them and cultivate their votes. And I think that people in America are starting to wake up, quite frankly. and are starting to recognize a lot of what's going on. One of the reasons that our campaign is succeeding is because even though every day, you know, the opposition is throwing everything they can against the wall and saying, Carson did this, and Carson did that, it's not sticking because the people know better. And they know that they're going to try to do that. And it is actually going to be the wisdom of the people that will save this nation. And Thomas Jefferson predicted that. He said we would reach this point because the people would be less vigilant. They wouldn't be paying attention. And as a result, the government would grow and infiltrate and begin to dominate their lives. But he said just before we turned into another form of government, the people of America would awaken. And they would rise up and they would regain control of their government. And I say this is the time to do that. Thank you very much.